I paid $10,000 a month for their Whims, but my family tried to wipe me off the face of the earth after I outshone my brothers and sisters, and then they begged for mercy and… So, here's the deal. My name's Nathan, and I'm 32. I've always been the quiet one in the family. My parents used to joke about it, calling me their little thinker, which sounds sweet until you realize that in a family as chaotic as mine, quiet translates to forgotten. My siblings, Lily, 35, Josh, 29, and Madison, 25, were always the louder, more demanding ones. They always had big dreams, expensive tastes, and endless needs. And somehow, I always found myself in the background, watching them take center stage. Growing up, I wasn't the kid anyone expected much from. I was just there. Not that I'm saying I was neglected or mistreated. I got by fine. I was just quietly pushed to the sidelines, while my siblings demanded the spotlight. Lily, the eldest, was the first in the family to really make it. She became a financial planner and let everyone know how successful she was. Josh, the charismatic one, had this wild entrepreneurial streak and a list of business ideas longer than a CVS receipt. Madison, the youngest, was the artist, always full of big dreams, but rarely any follow-through. Me? I was just the nerdy brother who got good grades, went to college, and graduated quietly while everyone clapped louder for the others. After college, though, I decided to do things my own way. I took a few risks, invested carefully, and eventually built up a business, mostly tech-based, which might sound boring, but it turned out to be lucrative. I didn't tell my family much. I'd learned early on that it was easier to keep things quiet around them. I figured there wasn't much point in bragging, especially since I was, well, me, the quiet one. Eventually, I started making enough money that I could help them out here and there. At first, it was little things, covering a car payment for Josh, paying a few months of rent for Madison. It felt good, like I was finally contributing something they couldn't ignore. And slowly, it grew. As my business took off, so did the monthly help I sent them. By the time I was 30, I was sending nearly $10,000 a month to help cover their whims, debts, and bills. I didn't need much for myself, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this would make me feel like I belonged, like I was truly valued in the family. But that's where I made my first mistake. It started subtly. At family dinners, there were quiet, almost pitying glances whenever I talked about work. Lily would always find a way to slip in comments about how finance was the true moneymaker, dismissing tech as a fad. Josh would shrug and mumble about how he couldn't imagine doing something so steady. Madison, sweet as she was, just nodded with vague interest, quickly switching the conversation to her next art project. I told myself it didn't matter. I was used to being overlooked. I thought, let them think what they want. I know my worth. Then, a few months ago, everything changed. My business hit a major milestone, a big acquisition that pretty much secured my financial future. It was huge for me, a game changer. My initial thought? I'd finally done something they couldn't brush off. Maybe, for once, they'd actually be proud. So, at the next family dinner, I brought it up casually. Hey, I've got some big news. We just closed a deal that puts us on the map in the tech world. Silence. My parents exchanged glances. My siblings barely looked up from their phones. Lily was the first to break the silence, saying, "That's nice, Nathan. But you know, finance is still the real backbone of the economy. What's tech without someone to manage it?" I laughed it off, trying to shrug it away, but then Josh chimed in, "Yeah, cool and all, but I just don't get how someone can be proud of working in a field with zero social value." Madison just nodded, saying something about how she's not really into corporate stuff. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Here I was, genuinely proud for once, and they'd managed to belittle it in a few quick comments. I tried to let it go, but the hurt stuck with me. The entitlement started building after that night. It was like, suddenly, my monthly contributions weren't a gift. They were an obligation. My parents even pulled me aside a few days later, gently suggesting I consider setting up a proper monthly fund for the family's needs. My mom went as far as to say, you know, Nathan, with all your success, it's important to take care of your family. Lily and Josh are under a lot of pressure. And Madison, well, Her art isn't exactly paying the bills. That line hit me hard. Take care of your family? Wasn't that what I'd been doing all along? And since when did I become the bank for everyone's personal dreams? The monthly allowance had started as an act of kindness, but now it felt like I was expected to pay for their lifestyles. The real blow came about 2 weeks later. I was out with friends, feeling good for once, when my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Can you cover Josh's credit card this month? He's struggling with his new business venture. When I replied that I was already contributing more than enough, she hit me back with a text that I still can't believe. She wrote, "You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for all the support we gave you growing up. Don't forget who helped make you." I sat there, stunned, replaying her words in my mind. Did they really think they were responsible for my success? That the years I spent working late nights, taking risks, and planning carefully were somehow owed to them? I started thinking back to all the moments when I'd asked for help growing up, moments when I was brushed off because they were too busy with Lily's events, Josh's projects, or Madison's latest artistic phase. I ignored Lily's text, but the sting stayed with me. The next family gathering, I tried to bring it up, just lightly, hoping to have a real conversation. I mentioned that I felt a little taken for granted, and, to my surprise, they all laughed it off. Josh put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, man. We know you're not like us. You're steady, practical. You'll always have our backs." I walked away from that gathering feeling hollow. I'd been giving so much of myself to a family that didn't see me, didn't respect me, and certainly didn't care about my own dreams or my accomplishments. I'd become nothing more than the family bank, the steady one, the quiet kid who'd grown up to fund everyone else's lives. And worst of all, they were starting to expect it. I decided then and there that things had to change. No more feeling like the overlooked sibling, no more letting them decide my value based on how much I could give. But as I would soon find out, breaking free from a lifetime of family expectations wasn't going to be easy. After that realization, I started making some small changes. I stopped immediately jumping at every request from my family. No more instant transfers when Josh's business took another dive. No more last-minute payments on Lily's condo. And definitely no more covering Madison's art studio rent in some trendy part of town. It wasn't like I was cutting them off completely. I just wanted them to see I had boundaries. But if I thought they'd accept that quietly, I was dead wrong. First, there was the confusion. At family dinners, they'd hint about financial problems, expecting me to swoop in like usual. When I didn't bite, I got the puzzled looks, the quiet sighs. My mom, bless her, tried the guilt trip. "Nathan, you know how hard it's been for your siblings. They don't have the stability you do." And yeah, that one stung a little, but I held firm. I wasn't about to be guilted back into enabling their every whim. Then, confusion turned into annoyance. Josh outright asked me if I'd forgotten the transfer I usually sent him. He said it like it was something expected, like I was late on a utility bill. When I reminded him that I'd been helping them for years and maybe they could try standing on their own, his response was priceless. He said, "Nathan, come on. You're the one with the reliable income. We all thought you understood your role in the family." My role? Apparently, my role was to keep my family's finances afloat. And the more I pushed back, the more that resentment started to bubble to the surface. A few weeks later, I overheard a conversation that really sealed it for me. It was at a family barbecue, and I just stepped inside to grab another drink when I heard Lily talking to Josh in the kitchen. They were laughing, and the conversation turned to me. Josh was saying something about how I wouldn't be anywhere without the family's help, and Lily, with that self-satisfied tone she always had, added, "It's funny how he thinks he's the successful one. We're the reason he even made it. If it weren't for us, he'd probably still be working some IT job." It's hard to describe the feeling. Like someone punched me right in the gut. Here I was, working my ass off, helping them out, and they thought I owed it to them? That I was somehow less because I'd chosen a different path? I tried to let it go, but every time I saw them after that, I could feel this wall of resentment building. I couldn't pretend anymore. I started to pull back even more, not just financially, but emotionally. If they only saw me as the family wallet, maybe it was time I stepped out of that role. But that's when things took a nastier turn. One afternoon, I got a call from a friend who lives in town. He sounded uneasy. "Hey man, I didn't know if I should bring this up, but there's a rumor going around about your business." Apparently, someone had been talking, suggesting that my company was involved in some shady practices. They'd been saying that my success came from cutting corners, maybe even engaging in some not-so-legal activities. It sounded absurd, and my friend admitted he didn't believe a word of it, but the fact that he'd heard it at all meant the story was spreading. The only people who'd know enough about me to start something like that were my own family. I confronted Josh first. I don't know why I started with him. Maybe because I thought he'd be the least likely to lie outright to my face. I pulled him aside during another family gathering and asked him straight up if he'd been talking about my business. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Come on, Nathan. You know people talk. Don't take everything so seriously." He tried to act like it was no big deal, just harmless gossip, but the way he brushed it off made me see red. I wanted to scream, to demand he explain why he'd stooped to spreading rumors about his own brother. But I kept my cool, said something vague, and walked away, leaving him there with that stupid smirk on his face. But it didn't stop there. Lily chimed in a few days later with one of her concerned sister phone calls. She called to tell me that people were starting to wonder about my business and that maybe it was time I reconsidered my priorities. "It's not a good look for the family," she said, like I was somehow bringing them down by existing outside their control. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, helping them every month without a second thought, and they were trying to ruin the one thing I'd built for myself. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly what I thought, but all I could say was, "Thanks for the advice, Lily." I hung up and just sat there, feeling the bitterness build up in my throat. The thing is, I'd always known my family was complicated, even selfish at times. But I never thought they'd actually try to sabotage me, especially after everything I'd done for them. It was like they couldn't stand the thought of me being more successful than them. Like I was supposed to be their quiet little support system, never stepping out of line or daring to shine brighter than they did. The rumor only got worse from there. I started getting odd questions from clients, people asking about things they'd heard through the grapevine. I had to do serious damage control, reminding everyone of my company's stellar reputation and the strict standards we upheld. Luckily, my clients knew me well enough to trust me, but it was exhausting and humiliating. I couldn't believe I was defending myself against my own family's attacks. After that, I knew I had to draw the line. I decided to stop all financial support. Not just cut it down, but stop completely. They didn't appreciate it anyway, and I was tired of being the golden goose that they could just bleed dry. I told myself they'd finally see that I was serious, that they'd realize they couldn't manipulate me anymore. Of course, that's not what happened. The next day, I got a barrage of messages. Lily, Josh, my parents, everyone was calling, texting, asking why the money hadn't come in. I let their messages sit for a few hours before finally responding, telling them simply that I was done. If they wanted help, they'd have to figure it out themselves. The reaction was explosive. Lily called me selfish, ungrateful, and accused me of abandoning them when they needed me most. Josh went on a tirade about how he'd counted on that money for a big investment and that I'd screwed him over. My mother called, crying, asking why I was being so heartless. And my dad, who rarely ever got involved in these things, left me a voicemail that made it clear he thought I was betraying the family by refusing to support them. For the first time, I realized they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an endless supply of cash. And the worst part? They actually believed they deserved it. After days of accusations, I stopped responding altogether. I needed a break. I needed to get my head straight and figure out what to do next. But it seemed like my family wasn't done. They weren't about to let me go so easily. And little did I know, they had one more surprise in store for me. One that would push me to a breaking point I didn't even know I had. The seeds of betrayal were firmly planted, and I knew this was far from over. The worst, it seemed, was yet to come. The first few days after I stopped the money flow were quiet, eerily so. I thought maybe they'd accepted it, maybe realized I'd finally put my foot down. But, of course, I should have known better. The silence was just the calm before the storm. On the fourth day, I got a text from my mom, saying, "Nathan, we need to talk. Family meeting this Sunday." No greeting, no question, just a direct statement, like I was being summoned. I should have ignored it, but a part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in my family, decided to go. Maybe I thought they'd finally understand, or maybe I just wanted some closure. Either way, that Sunday, I found myself walking into my parents' living room, where everyone was already waiting. The second I sat down, it started. Josh launched into a rant about how he'd lost a major investment opportunity because he was counting on my support. Lily chimed in, listing all the expenses she'd racked up expecting my usual help. Madison was quieter but looked at me with this hurt expression, like I'd personally betrayed her. And my parents just sat there, watching it all unfold, not a single word of support for me. I tried to keep calm, to explain that my support had always been a gift, not an obligation. I told them I'd helped because I wanted to, but that I'd realized I couldn't keep doing it at the expense of my own well-being. My voice was steady, but inside I was seething, waiting for even one of them to acknowledge what I was saying. That's when my dad finally spoke up. His tone was low, disappointed. "Nathan, family looks out for each other. I don't understand why you're being so selfish now. You've always been the one we could count on." Selfish. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Here I was, breaking my back to support them for years, and the one time I put up a boundary, they called me selfish. I'd always thought family meant looking out for each other, but apparently, that only applied when it benefited them. Finally, I snapped. I stood up and looked each one of them in the eyes, something I'd rarely done in these meetings, as I'd usually just sit there and take it. But this time, I had had enough. "No, I'm not selfish. You are. All of you," I said, my voice steady. "I've been giving and giving for years, but none of you ever once thought about what I needed. I'm not a bank, and I'm done pretending to be." I don't know what reaction I expected. Shock, maybe, or a moment of self-reflection. Instead, Lily scoffed. "Oh, come on, Nathan. You act like you're some saint. You wouldn't even be successful if we hadn't been there for you all these years. Mom and Dad practically raised you to be this successful. And now you're just going to walk away from all of us?" Josh chimed in, nodding. "Yeah, man. We all made sacrifices for each other. But I guess we know where you stand now. Just because you have a bit of money, you think you're better than us?" That's when my mom added, "We didn't raise you to be so ungrateful, Nathan." I couldn't even respond. I just stared at them, feeling like I was seeing my family for the first time. All those years of thinking I was helping, of believing I was supporting them, and here they were, twisting it into some twisted narrative that I owed them my success, my money, my everything. Without another word, I turned and walked out, my mom's tearful pleas following me down the hall. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get as far from them as possible. Over the next few days, I tried to piece myself back together. It felt like my whole world had been flipped upside down. The people I'd thought I was closest to had turned out to be strangers, cold, demanding, strangers who felt entitled to everything I'd worked for. The betrayal cut deeper than I could put into words, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. But then, in a twist I didn't see coming, an unexpected ally reached out. I'd almost forgotten about Olivia, an old family friend who'd once dated Josh. We hadn't been close, but we'd always gotten along. She sent me a message saying she'd heard about the family fallout and that she wanted to talk. I was hesitant, wary of anything remotely connected to my family, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet her for coffee. When we met, I was surprised to see genuine concern in her eyes. She started by apologizing for even bringing it up, but said she'd felt compelled to reach out after hearing what had happened. We started talking, and as the conversation flowed, I realized she understood my family dynamics far better than I'd expected. "I don't know how to say this," she said, stirring her coffee, "but your family has a way of manipulating people. Josh, especially. I know it might not be my place, but I think they've been taking advantage of you for years, and maybe you didn't see it because, well, they're family." Her words struck a chord. I'd always suspected that they were using me, but hearing someone else say it made it feel real. We talked for hours, and she shared stories of her own, about how Josh had used her financially during their relationship, always promising things he never delivered. She'd seen firsthand how my family's pattern of entitlement had damaged her own life, and now she was watching them do the same to me. With Olivia's encouragement, I started going through my finances, tracking just how much I'd given to my family over the years. It was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars that I'd poured into their lives, their whims, their projects. It was a harsh realization, but I needed to see it, to understand just how much of myself I'd given away without expecting anything in return. Olivia didn't just sympathize, she helped me strategize. We came up with a plan for setting boundaries, both financial and emotional, so that I could protect myself going forward. I'd thought I was standing strong by cutting them off, but she showed me that I'd only taken the first step. If I really wanted to move on, I had to close every door that led back to them. Then, in another unexpected twist, Olivia introduced me to a lawyer friend of hers, James. He was specialized in family law and financial disputes, and he offered to help me protect my assets in case my family tried anything extreme. I wasn't sure what extreme meant, but after everything, I knew better than to think they'd back down without a fight. James reviewed some documents and, to my shock, discovered something unsettling. Apparently, Josh had attempted to take out a loan in my name a few months back. It hadn't gone through because the bank flagged it for verification, but the fact that he'd even tried left me speechless. I realized then that my family had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. They weren't just pushing boundaries, they were actively trying to take from me, with or without my permission. Armed with this new knowledge, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was like a fog had lifted, and I could finally see my family for who they were. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but with Olivia and James by my side, I felt stronger than I had in years. I was finally ready to confront them, not just with words, but with proof of everything they'd done. The betrayal ran deep, but I wasn't going to let it ruin me. Not anymore. And as I prepared to face my family one last time, I knew this wasn't just about money or boundaries. This was about reclaiming my life, my identity, and my worth, after years of being told that I was nothing more than their golden goose. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to finally confront my family with all the evidence I had. I wasn't going to let them keep manipulating me, but this time, I wasn't going in alone. Olivia and James both insisted they'd be there to support me, which gave me a confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't just a pawn in my family's game anymore. I was about to take control for once. The day of the confrontation, Olivia suggested we meet at her place, a neutral ground where my family might actually listen instead of defaulting to their usual tricks. I'd notified my family that I wanted to meet to discuss a few unresolved matters. The message was vague, but they all showed up, likely thinking I'd had a change of heart and was ready to apologize for cutting them off. They arrived with their usual airs, though their expressions shifted when they saw Olivia and James sitting beside me. My parents seemed uneasy. Lily, suspicious. Josh had that smirk plastered on his face, the one he wore whenever he thought he was holding all the cards. I had to fight to keep my cool as they settled in, acting as if they were indulging me by coming at all. I started with the basics. I told them I knew about the rumors they'd been spreading and how it had affected my business. My mother blinked, as if surprised I'd figured it out, but Josh shrugged it off, saying, "Oh, come on, Nathan. People talk. We can't control what they say." I shook my head, finally feeling the anger bubble up. "No, Josh. You started those rumors. Don't act like you're innocent here. I'm not blind to what's been happening." For the first time, he looked taken aback, the smirk slipping just slightly, but he quickly recovered. I continued, laying out all the evidence I'd gathered over the years, the months of payments I'd made to cover their debts, the loans I'd paid off, and the extravagant expenses they'd splurged on, all on my dime. I even had screenshots of texts where they'd joked about their personal golden goose. Lily's face turned red as she glanced at the screen, and my parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. But Josh just crossed his arms, watching me with narrowed eyes. Then, with a deep breath, I handed the floor to James. He presented the bank documents showing Josh's attempted loan application in my name. Josh's face went pale as the color drained from him, and he stammered, trying to deny it. But James wasn't done. He had more, including records showing that Josh had been using my social security number in various applications, which could have severely damaged my credit had it gone through. Attempted fraud, James said, looking directly at Josh. If this had gone through, it would be grounds for legal action. Josh's voice wavered, but he tried to keep his composure. Nathan, come on. We're family. I didn't think it would be a big deal. I needed the money, and you've got more than enough. There it was, the entitlement laid bare. He thought he was entitled to take from me, without my permission, without my knowledge, because we were family. I felt a wave of both anger and sadness wash over me. After all these years, after everything I'd given, they still thought I owed them everything. My mother, finally grasping the severity of the situation, started pleading. Nathan, honey, please don't do this. We're your family. We love you. This is just a misunderstanding. I could tell she was panicking, seeing the possibility of her comfortable lifestyle slipping away. But it was too late. I couldn't unsee who they really were. Olivia stepped in then, her voice firm and calm. This isn't about family, Mrs. Davenport. This is about respect. Nathan has supported all of you for years, and you didn't just take advantage of it. You tried to exploit him. That's not love. Lily turned on Olivia, scoffing. Oh, look who's talking. The ex-girlfriend who's only here because she couldn't move on. Do you really think you have any place in this family? Her voice was dripping with contempt, as if Olivia was beneath her. But Olivia didn't back down. Actually, Lily, I'm here because I care about Nathan and don't want to see him hurt anymore. And I don't need your approval for that. The tension in the room was thick, and I could tell that for the first time. My family felt like they were on the defensive. I think they expected me to eventually cave in, like I always had, but this time, I was prepared to see it through. I stood up and looked at each of them, the people who were supposed to be my family, but who had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even imagined. I'm done. I'm not just cutting you off financially. I'm cutting you out of my life until you learn what it means to respect someone. You took advantage of me, tried to ruin my reputation, and still acted like I was in the wrong. This ends here. My dad, silent until that point, tried a different tactic, softer this time. Nathan, don't be hasty. We can work this out. We're a family, and families stick together through tough times. But I was done with the emotional manipulation. I wasn't going to fall for their tricks anymore. If you valued family, you wouldn't have done any of this to me in the first place. I replied, my voice shaking with the intensity of everything I was feeling. After a few tense moments of silence, they realized I wasn't going to back down. My mother started crying, and Lily looked furious. Josh muttered something under his breath, his face twisted with anger, but he didn't look me in the eye. They left, one by one, each of them hurling various accusations about how I was selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. But for the first time, their words didn't affect me. I felt free, like I was finally breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. After they left, I sat with Olivia and James, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I'd always hoped that my family would change, that one day they'd see me as more than a tool to be used. But they hadn't, and now I was finally ready to move on without them. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding my life, but this time with strong boundaries in place. I set up financial protections so that none of my family could access my assets again. Olivia was a constant source of support, helping me through the waves of doubt and guilt that inevitably came up, reminding me that I deserved respect and that I'd done the right thing. I also got a call from Madison, the only one who hadn't spoken during the confrontation. She apologized for not standing up for me and admitted she'd been scared of losing my support. I didn't know if I could fully trust her, but I appreciated the honesty. We talked for a while, and she admitted she felt trapped, unable to pursue her dreams without my help but unwilling to challenge the family dynamics. She promised to keep her distance and give me the space I needed, and I told her that, if she genuinely wanted to change, I'd be open to a relationship down the line. But for now, I needed time. Olivia and I grew closer, and I realized she understood me in ways my family never had. She'd seen their manipulative tactics firsthand, had experienced their entitlement and judgment, and still wanted to be there for me. It wasn't long before our friendship turned into something deeper, something I hadn't thought I'd find amidst all this chaos. Then, in a surprising twist, An anonymous blog post started circulating online about family betrayal and the hidden toxicity of people who demand unearned loyalty. It didn't mention me by name, but it was clearly about my story. I suspected Olivia might have written it, but she swore she hadn't. Regardless of who posted it, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of family manipulation and thanking the writer for speaking out. It felt strangely cathartic to read their stories, to know that I wasn't alone in this. Finally, I could see a future without my family's suffocating expectations weighing me down. I had Olivia, newfound respect for myself, and a clearer understanding of what I wanted in my life. The family I'd spent my life trying to support had tried to bring me down, but I'd survived it. And for the first time, I felt like I could thrive, free from their grip. The weeks that followed felt like the beginning of a new chapter, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a hard transition. The absence of my family left a void I hadn't expected. Even though they'd hurt me, they'd been my reality for so long. Now, for the first time, I had to rebuild without them. Luckily, Olivia and James were there every step of the way, keeping me grounded whenever I started to second-guess myself. One morning, a letter showed up at my office. No return address, no name. Inside was a handwritten note from my dad. His words were cautious, almost formal, as he explained that he didn't agree with how things had ended. He claimed that family should always put differences aside, and he hoped I would reconsider. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing, just this vague appeal to reconnect. It was the same tactic they'd used for years. No real accountability, just a call for me to return to the role they'd assigned me, the dutiful provider. I put the letter away without responding. There were too many wounds left unhealed, too many issues left unaddressed. For the first time in my life, I was choosing peace over appeasement, and that decision felt both empowering and terrifying. I knew that reconnecting on their terms would only reopen old wounds. I had to stay strong, even if part of me ached to believe they'd changed. Over time, I started receiving updates from distant relatives. It turned out that my decision had sent ripples through the extended family. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out, some supportive, others curious, asking if it was true that I'd walked away. It was as if I'd become a cautionary tale, the one who dared to stand up and say no. But even with the gossip swirling around, I felt more free and grounded than ever. Then, something unexpected happened. About 3 months after cutting off my family, I was approached by a small local news outlet. They'd seen the anonymous blog post about my story and wanted to interview me. Initially, I hesitated. Part of me feared the repercussions of going public. My family could retaliate, spin their own narrative, or even try to challenge me legally. But Olivia encouraged me to consider it, not as revenge, but as a way of finally reclaiming my voice. With her support, I agreed to an anonymous interview. I told my story honestly, from my struggles with feeling overlooked to my family's entitlement and manipulation. I didn't mention names, but I was candid about the emotional toll it had taken. The interview was published with the title, "When Family Crosses the Line: One Man's Journey to Self-Respect." The response was overwhelming. People reached out, sharing their own experiences, and for the first time, I felt understood. My story was no longer just a burden I carried alone. It had become a source of strength for others. The reaction was bigger than I'd anticipated. The piece gained traction online, going semi-viral as readers shared it widely. I started receiving emails from people in similar situations, some of whom thanked me for helping them recognize their own worth. I even heard from a few former friends of my family who privately told me they'd always suspected the golden child narrative had been manipulated. And then, one day, I received a message from someone unexpected, Madison. She apologized for how she'd let things go on, admitting that she'd been too afraid to stand up against the family's expectations. She'd read the interview, and it had struck a nerve. "I know I didn't defend you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized how much I let them control me, too." She asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. When we met, she was nervous, clearly struggling to find the right words. She told me that seeing everything laid out in the interview had forced her to confront her own role in the family dynamic. She hadn't actively participated in the manipulation, but she also hadn't stopped it. Madison admitted that she'd always envied my independence, but had been too afraid to pursue her own. We talked for hours, and by the end, I felt a tentative sense of closure. I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, but I appreciated her honesty. A few weeks later, I got word that Josh's latest business venture had failed spectacularly. He tried to get investors using inflated figures and promises, which didn't pan out, leaving him in debt. Without my financial support to bail him out, he was struggling. I thought I'd feel satisfied hearing it, but instead, I just felt free. His problems were no longer my responsibility. I didn't need to worry about cleaning up his messes anymore. Lily had gone mostly silent after our confrontation. I found out she tried to paint herself as a victim to some family friends, but they didn't buy it. She'd lost her steady supply of easy money, and the lifestyle she'd built on it was starting to crumble. I wouldn't be surprised if she reached out eventually, but for now, she kept her distance, which was exactly what I wanted. Through all of this, Olivia remained by my side, and our bond only grew stronger. I realized she was the first person in a long time who truly saw me for who I was, not for what I could give. We spent more time together, supporting each other, and before I knew it, what had started as a rekindling of friendship grew into something more. We hadn't planned on it, but sometimes, life has a way of surprising you. Olivia became my rock, and I realized I was happier than I'd ever been, without the weight of my family's expectations dragging me down. As I rebuilt my life, I found new friends and formed genuine connections with people who valued me for myself. I took time for hobbies I'd neglected, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and focused on expanding my business in ways that aligned with my values, not with the pressures I'd carried for so long. One day, as I was clearing out some old emails, I came across a voicemail from my mother, left weeks after our confrontation. She sounded broken, desperate, pleading for a chance to make things right. I debated for a moment, my finger hovering over the play button, but then, with a deep breath, I deleted it. I didn't need to hear her words to know that my decision had been the right one. I was finally free, finally choosing myself after years of putting everyone else first. Looking back, I can see that my family had always treated me as an asset, a resource to be tapped whenever they needed something. They didn't see me as a person with my own dreams, boundaries, or needs. And while it hurt to walk away, I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd paid for their whims, supported their lifestyles, and in return, they tried to erase everything I'd built. I still get the occasional message from extended family or an old friend asking if I'll ever make amends with my family. But for me, amends aren't about forgetting what they did. They're about learning to stand tall and honoring the boundaries I fought so hard to establish. I'm no longer the quiet, overlooked kid in the corner. I'm the man who chose to walk away, to value myself, and to reclaim my life from the people who tried to drain it dry. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. I was banned from my sister's wedding for defending my wife. My family demanded an apology, but I refused, and then for as long as I can remember, my sister Laura has run the show in our family. Growing up in Clearwater, a small town where everyone knew everyone, Laura was always the one people listened to. She's 3 years older than me and has a knack for taking control of any situation. Whether it was deciding which games we played as kids or organizing family holidays down to the minute, Laura made sure things went her way. Back then, I didn't think much of it. She was the bossy big sister, and I was the younger brother who went along with her plans to avoid an argument. Things shifted as we got older. Laura didn't outgrow her need to control everything. In fact, it intensified. She started treating family events like boardroom meetings, with her at the head of the table. She'd make decisions for everyone without asking, and if you didn't agree, she'd find a way to make you feel like the bad guy. I managed to brush it off for most of my 20s, but it became harder to ignore once I got married. My wife Megan is the kind of person who makes you feel at ease the moment you meet her. She's smart, thoughtful, and has a way of finding common ground with just about anyone. I met her 5 years ago when we were both living in Chicago. Megan had moved there for work, and I was trying to carve out a career in software development. We clicked immediately, and after 2 years of dating, I proposed. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Megan got along well with most of my family right away. My parents, Samuel and Rebecca, liked her, and my cousins enjoyed her sense of humor. Laura, though, was a different story. From the moment she met Megan, she treated her like an outsider. It wasn't blatant. Laura's too calculated for that. Instead, she'd make small, cutting remarks that were just subtle enough to fly under the radar for everyone else. Things like, "Oh, you don't know how we do things here," or, "Well, Ethan always loved my cooking. You must have really changed him." Megan would smile and let it slide, but I could see how much it hurt her. Over the years, the tension between Laura and Megan grew. Megan tried to connect with her, even going out of her way to help with family events and ask Laura for advice on traditions, but nothing worked. Laura kept Megan at arm's length, treating her like someone who didn't belong. When Laura announced her engagement last year, no one was surprised. She'd been dating Jason for about 4 years, and everyone knew a proposal was only a matter of time. Laura being Laura, the engagement was a grand production, complete with a professional photographer and a perfectly curated social media post. She was radiant as she showed off the ring, basking in the attention. Naturally, her wedding was expected to be the event of the year. Laura loved big, showy occasions, and this would be her crowning achievement. My parents were thrilled. Samuel even joked that Laura should run an event planning business with how meticulous she was. I tried to be happy for her, even though Megan and I both knew it would likely be another opportunity for Laura to make things about herself. When the invitation arrived at our house, I remember thinking it felt a little strange. The envelope was addressed only to me, which was odd since Megan and I were married, and invitations usually included both spouses. I opened it, half expecting to find Megan's name somewhere inside, but there was no mention of her. The invite was clear: Ethan Hayes, plus no one. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe Laura forgot to add Megan's name, or maybe it was a weird formatting issue. I called her to clarify, hoping it was a simple oversight. When she picked up, her tone was cheerful at first, but as soon as I brought up the invitation, her voice grew sharper. "Oh, that wasn't a mistake," she said. "We're keeping the guest list small, and Jason and I decided to prioritize immediate family. It's nothing personal." "Laura," I replied, trying to stay calm, "Megan is my wife. She is immediate family." She sighed, like she was explaining something to a child. "Ethan, we're on a tight budget, and we want to keep the day drama-free. You know how things can get." I didn't need her to spell it out. Drama-free was Laura's polite way of saying Megan wasn't welcome. My chest tightened with frustration. Megan hasn't done anything to deserve this. How can you expect me to come without her? "It's my wedding," Laura snapped. "My rules. I don't have to justify anything to you." I hung up feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about respect. Megan and I had been together for years, and excluding her felt like Laura was drawing a line in the sand. I hoped my parents would talk some sense into her, so I called Samuel and Rebecca. But when I explained what had happened, they shrugged it off. "Well, it's Laura's day," Rebecca said. "She's under a lot of stress, and if this is what she wants, we should respect her wishes." "Respect her wishes?" I repeated, stunned. "You want me to leave my wife at home and go to the wedding alone? How is that fair to Megan?" "Ethan," Samuel chimed in, his voice firm, "we're asking you to be the bigger person. Just go and keep the peace." I could barely believe what I was hearing. Keeping the peace had always been their priority, even if it meant ignoring Laura's behavior. Megan walked into the room as I hung up, her expression concerned. She asked what was wrong, and I told her everything. She listened quietly, her face unreadable. When I finished, she smiled softly and said, "It's okay. You should go without me. I don't want to cause any problems." Her words were kind, but I could see the pain in her eyes. She was trying to protect me, even though I knew how much this was hurting her. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Laura treat Megan like she didn't belong. If Laura wanted to exclude my wife, then she'd have to exclude me too. The weeks leading up to Laura's wedding were tense. My decision not to leave Megan behind had solidified in my mind, but it didn't make things any easier. I didn't tell Laura I was bringing Megan. I knew how she'd react. Instead, I RSVP'd for 2 and hoped that once we arrived, things might settle down. Maybe it would be awkward at first, but I figured once we were there, Laura would have no choice but to make peace with it. After all, it was her wedding day. Surely she wouldn't let something so petty ruin her celebration. Megan wasn't as optimistic. She kept suggesting that I reconsider going alone, even offering to call Laura herself to smooth things over. But I wouldn't let her do that. She had done nothing wrong, and I refused to let her grovel for the privilege of attending a family event. Megan eventually stopped trying to convince me, though I could tell she was uneasy about the whole situation. When the day of the wedding arrived, the air between us was heavy with unspoken tension. Megan stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen, a stark contrast to the extravagance we expected from Laura's event. She looked beautiful, but there was a sadness in her expression that broke my heart. I walked up behind her and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll be fine," I said, trying to sound confident. "No matter what happens, we're in this together." She nodded and gave me a small smile. "I just don't want to ruin anything for you, Ethan." "You're not ruining anything," I replied firmly. "We're family, and we're going together. That's final." The wedding venue was a sprawling country club just outside of town. It was exactly the kind of place Laura would choose, grand, picturesque, and dripping with luxury. We arrived during the cocktail hour, keeping to ourselves as much as possible. Megan and I found a quiet corner, sipping our drinks and watching the other guests mingle. For a brief moment, I thought we might actually get through the day unnoticed. That hope evaporated the second Laura spotted us. I saw her across the room, her eyes narrowing as she registered Megan's presence. Her expression shifted from surprise to barely contained fury, and she started marching toward us. My stomach sank. "Ethan," Laura hissed as she reached us, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the lively chatter around us. "What the hell is she doing here?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "She's my wife, Laura. Of course she's here." Her face flushed with anger. "I told you she wasn't invited. You had no right to bring her. This is my day, and you've completely disrespected me." Before I could respond, Megan stepped in. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. "Laura, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I just wanted to support Ethan and celebrate your wedding." Laura ignored her, turning back to me. "This is exactly why I didn't want her here. She always finds a way to make everything about herself." That comment hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. Megan, who had done nothing but try to fit in and keep the peace, was being painted as the villain yet again. I felt my anger bubbling to the surface. "This isn't about Megan," I said, my voice steady but firm. "This is about you and your need to control everything. She's my wife, Laura. If you can't accept that, then maybe I don't belong here either." By now, our conversation had drawn the attention of nearby guests. People were glancing over, their polite smiles turning into curious stares. Laura's voice rose, and I could tell she didn't care about the growing audience. "You don't belong here?" she snapped. "Fine. If you won't respect my wishes, then leave. Both of you." The air seemed to shift as her words hung between us. Megan's face turned pale, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us. A few relatives stepped forward, trying to mediate, but Laura wasn't backing down. In a move that seemed both absurd and entirely predictable, she called over a member of the event's staff, security, no less, and demanded that they escort us out. The man, clearly uncomfortable, hesitated before looking at me apologetically. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." I turned to Megan, who looked like she wanted to disappear. "If we're leaving together," I said, taking her hand. Laura's voice followed us as we walked toward the exit. "Good. Don't come back," she shouted, her tone triumphant. We left the venue in silence, the humiliation of the moment pressing down on us like a heavy weight. I drove aimlessly for a while, neither of us speaking. Eventually, we stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. It was nearly empty, the quiet atmosphere a stark contrast to the chaos we'd just left behind. We slid into a booth and ordered drinks, but neither of us had much of an appetite. Megan stirred her coffee absently, staring at the table. "I'm sorry," I said finally, breaking the silence. "I should have handled this better." Megan shook her head. You don't have to apologize, Ethan. This isn't your fault. I just hate that it came to this. Her voice cracked, and I reached across the table to take her hand. I hate it too, I admitted, but I don't regret standing by you. I never will. We sat there for a long time, saying little but finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the sky turned from twilight to darkness, and the events of the day began to feel like a distant nightmare. But I knew this was far from over. Laura's wedding might have been the breaking point, but the real fallout was just beginning. The fallout from Laura's wedding hit like a tidal wave, drowning any hope I had for reconciliation. By the time Megan and I got home that night, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Calls, texts, and notifications poured in faster than I could keep up. At first, I ignored them, too emotionally drained to deal with whatever fresh drama was brewing. But by the next morning, it became clear that avoiding it wasn't an option. The first call came from my parents. Rebecca's voice was tight, brimming with frustration. Ethan, I can't believe you did this to your sister. She worked so hard to plan that wedding, and you turned it into a spectacle. Mom, I didn't turn it into anything, I replied, trying to keep my temper in check. Laura excluded Megan. What was I supposed to do? Leave my wife at home like she didn't exist? You should have respected Laura's wishes, Rebecca snapped. It was her day, Ethan. Not yours. Not Megan's. Samuel chimed in from the background, his tone heavy with disappointment. You need to apologize. To Laura and to the family. This isn't how we handle things. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, Laura gets to humiliate my wife, and I'm the one who has to apologize? Do you even hear yourselves? She didn't humiliate anyone, Rebecca shot back. She just wanted to avoid conflict. You're the one who made it worse by bringing Megan when you knew she wasn't invited. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. Talking to them felt like banging my head against a wall. No matter how much I tried to explain my side, they had already made up their minds. Laura was the victim, and I was the villain. End of story. The family group chat was even worse. I opened it to find dozens of messages, most of them from Laura. She had wasted no time painting herself as the wounded party, claiming Megan had crashed the wedding and ruined her special day. A few aunts and uncles chimed in, offering their sympathies and scolding me for my disrespectful behavior. Family comes first, Ethan. One message read, You should have known better. Another declared, You owe Laura an apology. This isn't about you. It's about the family. I tried to defend myself, typing out a careful explanation of what had really happened. I told them I'd RSVP'd for two, that Megan hadn't crashed anything, and that Laura's exclusion of her was both hurtful and unnecessary. But my words only seemed to fuel the fire. Laura responded with venom. I made it clear Megan wasn't invited. You ignored my boundaries and made my wedding about you. How dare you? Her words stung, not because they were true, they weren't, but because they highlighted just how deeply entrenched her narrative had become. Megan wasn't even in the group chat, but her name was dragged through the mud by people who barely knew her. Toxic? Manipulative? One cousin even called her a troublemaker. It was surreal. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I muted the chat and put my phone down, my hands shaking with anger. Megan, who had been quietly watching me pace the room, approached and placed a hand on my arm. Ethan, it's not worth it, she said softly. Let them think what they want. You don't have to prove anything to them. Her words were kind, but I could see how much this was hurting her. She tried to hide it, but the pain was written all over her face. I pulled her into a hug, wishing I could shield her from all of this. A few days later, the situation escalated. Laura took to social media, posting carefully curated photos from her wedding. The captions were vague but cutting. Boundaries exist for a reason. Sad when some people can't respect that. Her friends flooded the comments with supportive messages, talking about how she deserved better and how some people just don't know how to behave. Megan, already feeling ostracized, decided to deactivate her accounts. I just need a break from all of this, she explained when I asked her about it. I don't want to see what they're saying. I didn't blame her. Every post, every comment, felt like another jab. Another reminder that Laura was doing everything in her power to isolate us. But I wasn't about to let her win. A few of my cousins reached out privately, expressing their sympathy but stopping short of offering real support. I think what Laura did was unfair. One text read, "But you know how she is. It's easier to just let her have her way." That was the crux of it, wasn't it? Everyone knew how Laura was, but instead of standing up to her, they tiptoed around her tantrums to keep the peace. It was infuriating. The breaking point came during a family dinner a week later. I went alone, hoping to explain my side in person and maybe find some middle ground. Megan didn't want me to go, but I assured her it was worth trying. The moment I walked in, the tension was palpable. Rebecca greeted me with a strained smile, while Samuel barely looked up from his plate. Laura, of course, was icy as ever, her arms crossed as she sat at the far end of the table. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to the wedding. Laura wasted no time accusing me of ruining her day, her voice dripping with self-righteous indignation. "You disrespected me in front of everyone, Ethan," she said. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for me?" I met her gaze, refusing to back down. "You disrespected my wife by excluding her. Do you have any idea how hurtful that was for both of us?" Rebecca cut in, her tone scolding. "This isn't about Megan. It's about family. You need to apologize to your sister." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "This is about Megan. She's my family too, whether you like it or not. And I'm not apologizing for standing by her." The table fell silent. For a moment, I thought I might have finally gotten through to them. But then Samuel shook his head, muttering, "Stubborn, just like always." Laura smirked, clearly satisfied with their response. "If you can't take responsibility for what you did, maybe you shouldn't come to family events at all." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I pushed back my chair and stood, my voice steady but laced with finality. "If that's how you feel, then maybe I won't." I walked out, leaving the dinner and the toxic dynamic behind. When I got home and told Megan what had happened, she hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to come between you and your family." "You didn't," I replied, my voice firm. "They made their choice. Now I'm making mine." It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. Megan and I were a team, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my family, tear us apart. Cutting ties with my family wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but after the disastrous dinner, it became clear that staying connected on their terms wasn't an option. Laura's wedding had been the flashpoint, but the deeper issue was their unwillingness to respect Megan and, by extension, our marriage. It wasn't just about a single event, it was about a pattern of behavior that had gone on for years. If they couldn't see that, there was no way forward. For the first few weeks, the silence was deafening. My phone, which had been buzzing constantly after the wedding, went eerily quiet. The family group chat carried on without me, its notifications muted on my phone. Megan and I settled into an uneasy calm, trying to focus on our life together while the fallout loomed in the background. But Laura wasn't finished. A few mutual friends reached out to me, cautiously asking if everything was okay. They'd heard rumors, absurd stories about how Megan had shown up uninvited to the wedding and caused a scene. It didn't take much to figure out where those stories were coming from. Laura had a way of twisting the narrative to suit her needs, and this time, she was painting Megan as a villain to deflect blame from herself. "She's really going all out," I told Megan one evening as I scrolled through yet another message from a confused friend. "It's like she won't rest until everyone thinks you're some kind of monster." Megan, sitting across from me with her laptop open, sighed heavily. "Ethan, I'm used to it by now. People can think what they want. The ones who matter know the truth." Her words were strong, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She deactivated her social media to avoid the whispers and passive-aggressive posts, but the damage was still there. Her once bright smile seemed dimmer, and she started declining invitations to social events, worried that she'd run into someone who had been swayed by Laura's version of events. The real blow came when one of Megan's closest friends, Claire, messaged her to ask if the rumors were true. Claire had heard from someone in my extended family that Megan had deliberately crashed the wedding to spite Laura. The accusation was so ridiculous that it would have been laughable if it hadn't come from someone Megan considered a friend. She actually believes it, Megan said quietly after showing me the message. I don't even know what to say to her. Then don't, I replied, anger bubbling beneath the surface. If she's willing to believe Laura over you, she's not really your friend. Megan nodded, but I could see how much it hurt her. She ended up writing a short, polite reply, denying the rumors and saying she needed some space. It wasn't just Claire, though. More and more, we found ourselves cut out of social circles that had once been safe havens. Dinners, game nights, casual get-togethers. Our invitations stopped coming. The isolation was subtle but unmistakable. The final straw came when I learned what Laura had been saying behind the scenes. A cousin, one of the few who still talked to me, admitted that Laura had been spreading lies about Megan for years. During our own wedding, Laura had complained that Megan was stealing the spotlight by being too charismatic and charming. She told relatives that Megan was fake, manipulative, and not good enough for me. Hearing this was like a punch to the gut. She's been jealous of Megan from the start, my cousin said, shaking her head. I don't know why, but it's obvious. I should have told you sooner. When I confronted my parents with this information, they dismissed it as family venting. Laura's always been passionate, Rebecca said, as though that excused years of cruel behavior. She doesn't mean half the things she says. Even if that's true, it doesn't make it okay, I replied. Do you know what it's done to Megan? To us? She's tearing this family apart, and you're letting her. Samuel sighed heavily. Ethan, this isn't just about Laura. You've been making things harder by refusing to let go of the past. I stared at him, incredulous. Refusing to let go? She's the one spreading lies and trying to ruin Megan's reputation. How is this on me? They didn't have an answer. They never did. Their loyalty to Laura was unshakable, no matter how toxic her behavior became. Around this time, Laura's carefully crafted image started to show cracks. Her controlling tendencies, once seen as a strength by some, began to alienate others. At a cousin's baby shower, she tried to take over the planning despite not being the host. When the actual host stood her ground, Laura stormed out and refused to attend. Word spread quickly, and for the first time, people began questioning her behavior. Her personal life wasn't faring much better. I heard through the grapevine that her marriage was already on the rocks. Jason, her husband, had grown tired of her spending habits and her tendency to micromanage every aspect of their lives. Rumors of financial troubles circulated, with whispers that their extravagant wedding had left them in debt. Despite all of this, my parents continued to defend her. When they called me one day to ask if I could help Laura financially, I was floored. You want me to bail her out after everything she's done? I asked, my voice rising with disbelief. She's your sister, Rebecca said, as though that explained everything. Family helps family. Not this time, I replied firmly. I'm not rewarding her behavior. If you want to help her, that's your choice. But don't expect me to. They didn't take it well. Rebecca accused me of being vindictive, while Samuel muttered something about letting pride get in the way. But I didn't care. I was done bending over backward for people who refused to see the damage Laura had caused. Meanwhile, Megan continued to handle everything with quiet dignity. She never retaliated, never spoke poorly of Laura, even when she had every right to. Her grace under pressure earned her the respect of a few family members who had stayed neutral throughout the drama. One cousin even told me privately, Megan's a class act. I don't know how she puts up with all of this. In truth, I didn't know either. But I was determined to make it up to her. If my family couldn't appreciate the incredible woman I'd married, that was their loss. My focus was on building a life with Megan, free from the toxicity that had defined so much of the past year. Little did I know, the drama wasn't over yet. Laura wasn't the type to let things go quietly, and her next move would bring everything to a boiling point. Despite my attempts to distance myself, Laura managed to pull me back into the storm. It started subtly, as it always did with her. Relatives began dropping hints during brief phone calls, mentioning how hard things had been for Laura lately. They spoke in low, concerned tones, implying that her struggles were somehow my fault. She's going through so much, one aunt told me over the phone. The least you could do is make amends. You know, for the sake of the family. When I asked what making amends meant, she skirted the question, eventually suggesting I apologize to Laura for the wedding debacle. It was laughable. Apologize? After everything Laura had done? It wasn't just insulting, it was absurd. But Laura's narrative didn't stop with whispered complaints. She found a new way to escalate the situation. A vague but pointed post on social media. It read, "Funny how some people think they're the victims when all they've done is cause harm. Family loyalty is a two-way street." She didn't mention me or Megan by name, but she didn't have to. Everyone in our circle knew what it was about. Her friends flooded the comments with supportive messages, validating her grievances. "You deserve better, Laura," one wrote. "Toxic people don't belong in your life," said another. It was the same tired routine, but this time it struck a nerve. I was tired of her controlling the narrative while Megan and I stayed silent. I forwarded the post to my parents, accompanied by a message. "This is what she's doing. Again. Do you still think I'm the problem?" Their response was as predictable as it was infuriating. Rebecca called almost immediately, her voice heavy with exasperation. "Ethan, why are you stirring things up? Just let it go." "Let it go?" I repeated, barely able to contain my anger. "She's out here slandering Megan and me, and you want me to stay quiet?" "She's just venting," Rebecca replied dismissively. "It's how she processes things." "Well, her processing is damaging Megan and me," I said firmly. "And if you keep defending her, you're part of the problem." That ended the call. I was starting to see a pattern with my parents, one where they enabled Laura at every turn while expecting me to shoulder the blame for the rift in the family. It was exhausting, but I was done playing along. The real tipping point came during a birthday party for a mutual friend. Megan and I debated whether to attend, knowing Laura would be there, but in the end, we decided not to let her presence dictate our lives. The party started out fine. We stuck to our corner, chatting with old friends and enjoying the atmosphere. For a while, it felt almost normal. Then Laura made her move. She approached us mid-conversation, her expression neutral, but her voice loaded with venom. "So," she began, loud enough for others nearby to hear, "enjoying yourselves? Must be nice not having to face the consequences of your actions." The room fell silent as everyone turned to watch the confrontation unfold. Megan's hand tightened around her glass, her knuckles whitening. I stepped forward, keeping my voice steady. "Laura, not here. This isn't the time or place." She ignored me, her voice rising. "You've turned half the family against me, Ethan. Do you even realize what you've done? Or do you not care?" At that moment, something unexpected happened. A few mutual friends stepped in, their voices calm but firm. "Laura, this isn't fair," one said. "We've all seen how you've treated Megan and Ethan. Maybe it's time to take some responsibility." Another chimed in. "You can't keep blaming them for everything. This has gone too far." Laura's face flushed crimson as she looked around, clearly taken aback. For the first time, she didn't have the upper hand. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed out, leaving a trail of awkward silence in her wake. After she left, several people approached us, offering their support. It was a small but significant victory. For once, the truth had broken through Laura's web of manipulation. But the respite was short-lived. A few weeks later, one of my cousins posted a detailed account of the wedding drama on social media. It didn't include names, but anyone who knew the situation could easily connect the dots. The post went viral within days, attracting thousands of comments. Most sided with Megan and me, calling Laura's behavior controlling and unfair. It was validating, but it also brought a wave of attention we hadn't anticipated. Laura, predictably, was furious. She accused me of orchestrating the post, despite my complete lack of involvement. The family group chat exploded once again, with Laura accusing me of trying to destroy her life. Her tone grew more hysterical with each message, and when I didn't respond, she blocked me entirely. The fallout rippled through the family. More relatives began distancing themselves from Laura, fed up with her antics. A few even reached out to me privately, admitting they'd been wrong to side with her. It was a small consolation, but it didn't erase the damage she'd caused. Meanwhile, Megan's family stepped in to fill the void left by mine. They invited us to gatherings, checked in regularly, and made us feel valued. The contrast was stark. While my own family clung to toxic dynamics, Megan's embraced us with open arms. It was a lifeline, one I hadn't realized we needed until it was there. Then, an unexpected opportunity came our way. I was offered a job abroad, a position I dreamed of for years but never seriously considered because of family ties. With nothing holding us back, Megan and I decided to take the leap. Before we left, I met with my parents one last time. I laid out clear boundaries, telling them I was open to rebuilding our relationship if they could respect Megan and acknowledge the harm Laura had caused. Rebecca looked pained, Samuel stoic, but neither of them apologized. Still, I left that meeting with a sense of closure. A month later, we packed our bags and started a new chapter. For the first time in years, the weight of family drama was off our shoulders. It wasn't the life I'd envisioned, but it was ours, and that was enough.